So war is ugly, and in this section, the war gets ugly for Abram. Hey, welcome to Genesis 14. We're practicing our Hebrew. One good way to review is just read a few verses every day. Work on those verbs, and that's what we're doing. So we're in the middle of the story. This is the fourth story or the fourth episode in the Abram stories. And we've had a war going on, and we're talking about the winning kings. And it says, Vayechachu et kol rakush Sodom v'amorah ve'et kol oklam. So Vayikachu, something's missing, but hopefully we see that kof and that chet and we just tell ourselves it's got to be lakak, right? So the lamed's gone. It behaves like a first noon. It's the only lamed that does. It tried to become a dagesh forte in that kof, but it couldn't in this case because it's over a vocal shava and that got rid of the dagesh. In any case, yod at the front, u at the end, third masculine plural. They took, what did they take? They took all of the rakush of Sodom and Gomorrah. So rakush, this is the construct form, but that's also the lexical form. It's a monosyllabic word. I think in Akkadian that would be riksu, and from the verb rakasu, which is to gather, to bind, to tie, to it has a pretty wide range of meanings. And when it comes over into the noun, it's like all the stuff, the belongings, the paraphernalia, the equipment, the things, right? So it's a pretty broad term for reference to stuff that one might use in a variety of endeavors. So they took all of Sodom and Gomorrah's stuff and ve'et kol oklam and all of their food. Vayeleku. So here we're also missing something. What are we missing in Vayeleku? Yeah, this is from halak, and halak behaves like it's a first yod verb, and so the hey has become part of the tseire under the prefix yod there. So they took it and they went. They took it and they left. And then we get the same two verbs again, and the same noun, rakush, in there, but we get more specific, and this is where it gets personal for Abram. Vayechachu et Lot ve'et rakusho ben achi Avram. So they took Lot and his paraphernalia, and then we describe Lot as the son of the brother of Abram. So Lot, Abram's nephew. So this is not actually a subsequent action to the previous. It's part of the action that was previously mentioned. They took Lot and his stuff, Vayeleku, and they went. And then a parenthetical note, Vahu Yoshev Bisodom. This is kind of a reminder. We heard about this in an earlier story. He was living in, or at least near, but we'll find out later, in Sodom. And that's a really short paragraph, so we're going to do 2 paragraphs in this video. So we are starting this paragraph with a preterite, not with vayehi, not with noun first, but we are changing the subject, and we're going to have an exchange between this new character in the story and Abram. So vayavo hapalit. And this is articular to refer to the category. So we wouldn't use an article in English. So an escapee, a fugitive, came, vayaged la'avram ha'ivri. So vayaged, we're missing a root letter again. We see a dagesh in the gimel, and so that is for the first radical noon. So that was first radical noon over a silent shava with the prefix having patak, and that is a hifil ID badge. So we've got a hifil preterite, 3ms of nagad. This fugitive told something to Abram the Hebrew, the Ivri. And referring to Abram in that way probably is just to indicate the perspective of this fugitive, because to him, Abram's a foreigner, an outsider, and it kind of puts that perspective on the text. Then we get a parenthetic note about Abram, just like we had one about Lot in the previous paragraph. Vahu shokain be'elone mamre ha'emori. So he was dwelling, well, not in the oak trees, but by or near or at the oaks of Mamre, the Amorite. And he is further described as Achi Eshkol v'Achi Einer, So the brother or the relative or the clansman of Eshcol and the brother, etc., of Aner. Then Vahem Ba'alei Berit Avram. They were owners of an Abram covenant. So this simply means that they were in a covenant relationship with Abram. And so they're his allies. So the fugitive comes, he tells Abram what's happened with Lot. Then Vayishma Avram. Abram heard. So the one guy tells, Abram hears. And what does he hear? Abram heard Ki Nishba Achiv. He heard that his brother, now we've been told it's his nephew, but Ach is more broad than just your blood brother, so his relative. Then Nishba, let's parse that. This one's a little bit tricky, because if we say what's at the end, we see a Kametz He, and we don't know if that's a Kametz He ending or if that's R3, right? Because if we had a verb that was originally third radical yod, that's gone, and in the 3ms forms we would have Kametz He as if that's the third radical, and it wouldn't be even a 3fs verb ending. So we got a couple possibilities there. When we go to the front, we see a noon. So noon could be a nifal noon. Noon could be a first common plural imperfect noon. Noon on the front and hey at the back. That could be a cohortative. So if we don't recognize the root and fit it into the context right away, we could be thinking that we've got several options. Maybe we think of yashav. Maybe we think of shuv. Maybe we think of shava. Let's kind of weigh those. If we had yashav and the yod was lost, it would have been lost because it had been over a silent shava, and that would trigger the yod to become part of the previous vowel. So we should get some kind of long E-class vowel, either tsere or hirik yod with a mater. We don't have that, so we can scratch yashav off the list. What about shuv? Well, if this was, say, a cohortative of shuv, then we ought to have the mater in there, or we ought to have at least an U-class vowel with the shin, nashuva. And we don't have that. What if we had, say, a nifal of shuv, right? R2 vav for a nifal. Well, normally the nifal is going to combine an A-class vowel under R1 with that R2 vav and make a holum there, nashov or nashova. And we don't have that either. This also isn't any sort of PL. That's not a dagesh forte in the bet. How do we know it's not a dagesh forte? Because it's preceded by a shava, right? Our litany is forte follows a full vowel. So if we were going to have any sort of PL-ish thing, we would need a vowel under the shin. So we've eliminated a lot of possibilities. Now we need to work with the idea that this is from shava. If that is the case, then the hey is R3. I mean, it's phony, but it's in the spot of R3, and that's not a feminine verb ending. And so the noon would be a prefix, and so that could be a nifal. That would be the perfectly normal form for a nifal. Nifal perfect 3ms. Abram heard that his relative had been taken captive. It's a passive construction. Then we get Vayarek et Chanikaiv Yilidei Veto. And we've got, first of all, a root that we probably don't recognize, and then we've got a text critical note on that. And matter of fact, there's a lot of words here that we may not recognize. So he somethinged his Chaniko, that's a reference to his trained men, trained fighters. Yilidei Veto looks like it means those born in his household. And so either that means that when Abram came to Canaan, and that would include, all the long trip down to Egypt and back and everything, that he had a real massive company of people with him, or perhaps among the allies that he has, there are a number of native born to those groups that are trained for battle, and he can call them up to fight just as well as any of the people who work for him. And in any case, let's look at this vayarek. If we take that verb as it is, we've got nothing at the end. Vav patak dagesh on the front for preterite. Dagesh is in yod for 3ms. And then we've got an E-class vowel there under the second radical. So there's like two options we have. This is either a hifil, because you have an A-class under the prefix and an E-class theme vowel, or it could be a cal, where the second radical is yod, because that would also give us an E-class vowel in there. Either way, because the first radical has moved to start a syllable, the prefix has ended up with pretonic open long comates. That would be true for the cal or for the hifil. Now then, what about that note? The note says LC squiggle vayadek, sikfert G arithmesen. Okay, so what's all that stuff mean, right? So the L and the C, lega cum, read with. The Samaritan Pentateuch, we've been having quite a few notes referring to the Samaritan Pentateuch in this section. And then Vayadek. What's the difference? Yeah, it's Dalet versus Resh. So it's a pretty, two pretty similar letters, easy to confuse. And then it says, thus probably, like sik for tasa, the LXX, the Greek translation, because it has arithmesen. Now that sounds a little bit like arithmetic, right? That's a math word, a counting word. So in Hebrew, usually if we are going to call up fighters, well, you call them, then you maybe assemble them, then you count them because you want to know how many you have. And you usually do that with pakad. You count them off. And pakad then ends up getting translated as to muster, because it is one piece of a much larger activity of getting all the people together, that in English refers to that activity as mustering them. But strictly speaking, it probably just means to count them. Sometimes mana is used the same way, and not as often as pakad, and maybe a little bit more often for foreigners, describing foreigners rather than Hebrews, until we get into late Hebrew, and then we see mana functioning as pakad had earlier quite a bit. So the Greek seems to signal that they took it as a counting term. So even though it wouldn't be really common, in fact, let's go over to halot. And if we look up this root, they've conjectured a Duke 3, and they refer to Genesis 14:14 specifically for this word. So if we accept the emendation, or we accept the witness of the Samaritan Pentateuch, then we have here a different word. By context, it would seem to mean to review or to muster, to count the people. In Jewish Aramaic of the Babylonian tradition, it means to scrutinize, which is a lot like what pakad means, because that means like to take note of, to inspect. And so it fits well into that military context when you're getting troops together, counting them off, making an assessment. But it does conclude by saying uncertain. So it's not fully clear, but we could certainly read Vayadek and take it as the mustering of troops. What does reek mean? If we would look that up, reek is a stative verb to be empty. So when you would put it into the hifil, it would be he emptied out his trained men. And maybe that would work as an English idiom. You know, if you empty the city, that means you're taking the people out of it. The city emptied of its army because they went out to war or something. But it seems to be much more of an English idiom than a Hebrew one. One way or another, he does get trained people ready for battle. And then we're told how many there are. Shmona asar u shalosh me'ot. 8 10, 18, and 300s. So 318 men, Vayirdof ad Dan. And there we have an anachronistic use of the geographic name. So some scribe later on presumably altered the text so that it would be understood by its current audience. So he pursued them as far as Dan. And then we'll just have to come back in the next paragraph to see what happens when he chases after these 4 kings with his 318 men.